Hi there, and welcome to the Daily Gardener, and thank you for listening. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling. It's April 2nd. Today we celebrate the discovery and naming of the state of Florida. We'll also learn about one of the best botanical illustrators ever born, as well as the man who introduced goldfish to Holland. We'll celebrate the publication of the very first successful agricultural journal. And today's unearthed words feature fun words about April. We grow that garden library with a book about trees that was released a year ago today, and it won the Pulitzer Prize in fiction. And then we'll wrap things up with the fascinating story of the German artist who found surreal inspiration in the natural world. But first, let's catch up on some greetings from gardeners around the world in today's curated news. Lena Jensen wrote in to ask about her endless summer hydrangea. Last year, she said that her plant seemed to thrive, but it just never got a bloom. You know, this can be a common concern with endless summer hydrangea. Sometimes up north, winter can be so bad that the top growth is killed, and that'll completely wipe out that first flush of blooms because that forms on the old wood. Another thing that can happen is that heat or drought can really be harmful to these plants. Too much of either can actually completely stop the formation of flower buds on that new growth. And when you first buy an endless summer hydrangea, it's important to realize that these new plants will often spend most of their energy establishing roots instead of establishing flowers. Now, luckily, once they get established, they start going into flowering mode. And they'll go right back to doing what they've always done, which is putting their energy toward developing those gorgeous flowers. And there's one last piece of advice regarding your endless summer hydrangea. Don't over-fertilize it, and don't add fertilizer that's high in nitrogen, because that can encourage more leaf growth and actually discourage flowering. In fact, once the 4th of July hits, it's a good time to stop fertilizing and adding acid altogether. Now, why is that? Well, if you fertilize late in the season, when the temperatures heat up, you can actually encourage more growth. And that late season growth can be killed during the winter. It's very vulnerable to fluctuating winter temperatures. The best thing you can do for your hydrangea is to make sure that they're getting plenty of water all season long. Keep that watering steady. Get on a watering program, because regular watering, that alone can ensure better flowering for your hydrangeas. And herbalist Terry Roy recently wrote in to say that she uses rose hips in her tea. She creates a tea with mullein and steeps both the rose hips and the mullein in hot water for several minutes. She writes, "This is a nice little tea, and the rose hips add vitamin C." Then finally, Sarah Melm shared photos of her kitchen garden from last summer, and then writes that although last year's kitchen garden was a huge success, this year I'll be choosing not to have as many annuals in the garden. With money being tight, I'll spend more of my money on herbs and edibles. She writes that she especially enjoys planting kale, zucchini, artichokes, fennel, beets, asparagus, and peppers. And she's encouraging, even though this year will be an unusual year for gardeners, the garden will still be beautiful, and it will give us something to do. I couldn't agree more. Now, if you'd like to participate in the Gardener Greetings segment, just send your garden pics, stories, birthday wishes, and so forth to Jennifer at thedailygardener.org. And to listen to the show while you're at home, just ask Alexa or Google to play the Daily Gardener podcast. It's just that easy. Today's curated news is from Art Fund. They raised enough money to save Derek Jarman's Prospect Cottage for the nation. Back in December, one of the episodes of The Daily Gardener took an in-depth look at Derek Jarman and his wonderful Prospect Cottage. The cottage was at risk of being sold privately, its contents dispersed, and the artistic legacy lost forever. And that has happened just all too often to so many wonderful gardens. So I was really glad to see that Derek Jarman's Prospect Cottage will be saved. This site really tugged at people's heartstrings. In just 10 weeks, over 8,100 donations were made by the public, and over £3.5 million were raised to save Derek's legacy. Celebrities were even involved in this effort, and the actress Tilda Swinton said, "Derek initiated the project of making this little house on the shingle the unique and magically empowering space it has come to be, not only for him, but for so many of us." Well, I am so tickled that wonderful site is going to be preserved for today and for future generations. That's tremendous. Now, next up is a post I wrote for the National Garden Bureau, and it's called Goals for Your 2020 Garden. Here's what it says. What are you curious about in your garden? What are you hoping to learn this season? How will your gardening change during the pandemic? Your greatest accomplishment might be the result of something you didn't plan to learn. Maybe you've always been a flower gardener, but this year you feel compelled to grow some edibles, and you discover the joy of growing your own garlic. Last year you grew tomatoes to great success and ended up sharing some with neighbors. This year, you want to grow even more to help out the local food shelf. Maybe you didn't like pulling weeds for your mom, but now with the pandemic, you suddenly find that tending to the yard is calming and anchoring, and now you want to have a garden of your own. Our gardens are classrooms, and those classrooms are filled with many teachers or upagurus. Upaguru is the Hindu word for the teacher next to you at any moment. The upagurus in your garden might be the seeds you just ordered, or a mystery plant that you inherit, the hydrangea that refuses to flower, or the rose that won't give up. This year, they say there will be more new gardeners than ever as a result of the COVID-19 restrictions. So I'm calling on all gardeners to share your expertise. With this in mind, I want to draw 3 points to your attention. First, if you don't consider yourself an expert, think again. One of the things that can happen to gardeners is that we can underestimate our own expertise or experience in the garden. But any experience is helpful to a gardener just starting out. To new gardeners, you can be a gardening upaguru. Second, new gardeners need encouragement. Remind new gardeners that their primary job this year is simply to be a good student of gardening. They don't need to get straight A's in the garden. Let them know that no one is putting pressure on them to replace the produce section of the grocery store. One of the biggest commitments new gardeners can make is simply to learn more about gardening. Encourage them to focus on the teaching, whether that's from books or podcasts or neighbors, because the teaching is what makes us better gardeners. And finally, the benefits of gardening go beyond food. There's a physical, mental, and spiritual upside. Any gardener knows that being active in the garden is a form of exercise, just like walking, running, or playing basketball. It is legit exercise. And as a pastime or passion, gardening is a return to nature. It is connection with the natural world, and it is grounding, and it is centering, and it is good for us physically and emotionally. You know, after Walt Whitman suffered a debilitating stroke, he recovered by spending time in nature. The 2 years that he spent walking the woods were his primary therapy, and he forever credited nature with his recovery. This is why I end every episode with, "For a happy, healthy life, garden every day." It's not just a slogan. I really believe those words. All right, that's it for today's gardening news. Now, if you'd like to check out my curated news articles and blog posts for yourself, you're in luck, because I share all of it with the listener community in the free Facebook group, the Daily Gardener Community. So there's no need to take notes or search for links. The next time you're on Facebook, just search for Daily Gardener Community and request to join. I'd love to meet you in the group. Here's today's brevities. On this day in 1513, Juan Ponce de Leon claimed new land for Spain, and he names his discovery La Florida in a nod to the Easter season, which the Spaniards called Pascua Florida, or Festival of Flowers. And today is the birthday of a female botanical illustration powerhouse, Maria Sibylla Merian. Maria was born on April 2nd, 1647, and as a frame of reference, Isaac Newton was only a few years older than her. Unlike Newton, Merian's work was largely forgotten, but over the past century, her work has made its way to us. There's just something about it. In 2011, Janet Daly, a retired teacher and artist from Springfield, Illinois, became so captivated by Merian's life story that she started a Kickstarter campaign so that she could follow Merian's footsteps to the mecca of her best work, Suriname. And in 2013, Merian's birthday was commemorated with a Google Doodle. As for Merian, she would have delighted in our modern-day effort to plant milkweed for the monarchs. The concept that insects and plants are inextricably bound together was not lost on Merian. In her work, she carefully noted which caterpillars were specialists, meaning they ate only one kind of plant. Now, you can relate to that if your kid only wants to eat mac and cheese every day. But now you can reframe it. They aren't being picky, they're just being specialists. And before all the wonderful graphics on social media and high-tech renderings, drawings like Merian's were a holy grail for plant identification. One look at Merian's work, and Linnaeus immediately knew it was brilliant. Merian helped classify nearly 100 different species long after she was gone from the earth. And to this day, entomologists acknowledge that the accuracy in her art is so good that they can identify many of her butterflies and moths right down to the species level. Between 1716 and 1717, during the last year of her life, Merian was visited multiple times by her friend, the artist George Gazelle, and his friend, Peter the Great. Oh, to be a fly on the wall for that meetup. Gazelle ended up marrying Merian's youngest daughter, Dorothea Maria, and Peter the Great ended up with 256 Merian paintings. In fact, Peter the Great so loved Merian's art that when she died shortly after his last visit, he immediately sent an agent to buy up everything she had left, all of her remaining watercolors, and then the agent brought them home to St. Petersburg, where they remain to this day. And here's an enchanting story for you. On the Maria Sibylla Merian Society website, there's a video that shows the writer Redmond O'Hanlon flipping through an original Merian folio with gloveless hands, no less. Now, O'Hanlon is a scholar and an explorer himself, and he is known for his journeys to some of the most remote jungles of the world. So he knows what Merian had to go through to create her beautiful botanical illustrations. And there is one point in this video where he is flipping through her work that he just stops and he becomes speechless. And then he just lets out this big sigh and he says, "It's so simple. Without the slightest doubt, she was the greatest painter of plants and insects who ever lived." And then he says, "Just between you and me, she's the greatest woman who ever lived. You can keep Catherine the Great. Maria Sibylla Merian is the real heroine of our civilized time." Now that's an endorsement. And today is the birthday of the Dutch naturalist and pond owner extraordinaire, Job Baster. Baster was one of the first Dutch nature researchers to use a microscope to look at flora and fauna. He wrote down his findings in a book, and he also wrote an excellent translation of Philip Miller's work on horticulture. In 1758, Baster was given a beautiful property loaded with trees and 2 large ponds. He called it Zonnehof, Sunshine Farms. And as a new pond owner, Baster decided to try his hand at breeding goldfish. A versatile scientist, Baster exchanged letters with the leading biologists of his time, and the first 12 fish arrived thanks to a contact in England. But unfortunately, all the goldfish died. So the following year, Baster got 18 more fish. This time, 2 died, but the rest survived. And then fast forward 13 years later, and Baster owned more than 1,000 goldfish. When Job Baster died, an inventory of his estate showed that all of his goldfish had been sold, making him over 700 guilders, which was not a small amount at that time. The goldfish had made him a small fortune, and Baster was forever remembered as the man who introduced goldfish to the Dutch. In addition to raising goldfish, Baster also drew them, and then he hand-colored the images. Now, I have looked at these drawings online, and I'm telling you that they have an iridescence that makes them look like someone just laid out a real goldfish on the page. They're that lifelike after all this time, so it's worth checking them out. Now, Baster also had a large collection of shells, and during his lifetime, adhering shells to furniture was a big fad in Europe. So Baster took that fad and ran with it. He covered a buffet that he had in his house with European and tropical shells. And then at the bottom of this buffet is the coat of arms of the Baster family, which was a jumping greyhound. And then his wife, Jacoba, had a coat of arms from her family as well, which was a climbing lion. And so both this jumping greyhound and climbing lion were incorporated into this buffet, and they were all made out of shells. In fact, you can see the Baster buffet at the Royal Zeeland Society of Sciences in Holland, which is on my bucket list. One sightseer, after seeing this buffet, commented, "You can almost hear Baster's wife, who donated the piece to the museum after his death, saying, 'Job, will you do something with all these shells?'" I thought that was hilarious. Anyway, the scientific world owes a debt of gratitude to this versatile explorer of the natural world and pond owner extraordinaire, Job Baster, who was born on this day in 1711. And finally, on this day in 1819, almost 200 years ago, the very first successful agricultural journal was published in Baltimore, and it was called American Farmer. Happy birthday. In unearthed words, here are some funny, happy words about April. This first one's from the American lyrical poet and playwright Edna St. Vincent Millay. April comes like an idiot, babbling and strewing flowers. Here's one from the American writer Harriet Prescott Spofford. A gush of birdsong, a patter of dew, a cloud and a rainbow's warning. Suddenly sunshine and perfect blue, an April day in the morning. Ah. Here's one from John Greenleaf Whittier, the American Quaker poet. 'Tis springtime on the eastern hills, like torrents gush the summer rills. Through winter's moss and dry, dead leaves, the bladed grass revives and lives, pushes the moldering waste away, and glimpses to the April day. Here's a little verse from the English poet Robert Southey. 3 things a wise man will not trust: the wind, the sunshine of an April day, and woman's plighted faith. This next one's from Lucy Larcom, the American teacher, author, and poet. The children with the streamlets sing when April stops at last her weeping, and every happy growing thing laughs like a babe just roused from sleeping. And finally, here's a famous line from the American illustrator, author, and naturalist William Hamilton Gibson. Oh, the lovely fickleness of an April day. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, The Overstory by Richard Powers. It's so hard to believe that this book was published on this day already a year ago in 2019. It's beautiful, and I remember when it came out. This book won the Pulitzer Prize in Fiction. It's a New York Times bestseller. The author Ann Patchett said it's the best novel ever written about trees, and really just one of the best novels, period. This book is 512 pages of stories, or more precisely, fables, and they're all told with trees in mind. This is Richard's 12th novel, and in it we learn about trees and their world. It's just as big as ours. It's just as interconnected and creative and responsive and powerful. Yet so many people are oblivious to trees and what they have to tell us about the world we share together. You can get a used copy of The Overstory by Richard Powers and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for under $14. Finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. Today is the birthday of the German Dadaist and Surrealist Max Ernst, who was born on this day in 1891. One of the first gardens that Max ever sketched were the gardens at Ruhl Castle, the castle in his hometown. In fact, some of his most beautiful work involves flowers and forests, suns, birds, and gardens. Max had no formal training, yet he created a technique called frottage, or texture rubbings, or rubbing on paper, and he used plants or the texture of wooden planks and other items in the house to create some wonderful artwork. And he also created grattage, or scraping paint across the canvas, to reveal the imprints of the objects placed beneath it. At one point in his life, he lived with the surrealist painter Leonora Carrington, who once reflected on their relationship with the natural world. In fact, gardeners will be able to relate to Max and Leonora drawing inspiration from the garden in early morning. As Leonora recalled, "We went down into the silent garden. Dawn is the time when nothing breathes, the hour of silence. Everything is transfixed. Only the light moves." And Max once remarked, "Art has nothing to do with taste. Art is not there to be tasted." Throughout his life, Max was not comfortable with his fame. He once famously lamented that he would rather have a single wild strawberry than all the laurels in the world. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener, and remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. During the COVID-19 pandemic, The Daily Gardener is produced in lovely Wyoming, Minnesota. You can find today's show notes over at thedailygardener.org. That's thedailygardener.org. And to participate in the Gardener Greetings segment, send your garden pics, stories, birthday wishes, and so forth to Jennifer at thedailygardener.org. And to listen to the show while you're at home. Just ask Alexa or Google to play the Daily Gardener podcast. It's that easy. You can find the Daily Gardener on all your favorite social media, and don't forget to share the show with all your garden friends. Finally, I want to thank my fabulous behind-the-scenes team of Brooke, Kiana, and Paige, and my editor, Eric Begay. Have a great day in the garden, and we'll see you tomorrow.